Hello everyone, can you hear us? Let us know if the sound is working where you are watching from. Zoom, can I get a couple of thumbs up? Yeah, good, okay, excellent. Jessica, can I ask you to post in the chat if that's okay? The dedication. Let's just check as well on Facebook if that's working. If you could let us know if you could hear us on the Facebook feed, that would be wonderful. Where are we? There we go. Okay. All right. Just one more share. Post and finally. Okay. I believe we're ready to go. And there we are. Hold on. Nope. Okay, that fell down. That's not going to work. It fell down and was facing backwards. There we are. Okay. Hoping that this works, and let's get started. Okay. So in our final week for this class of Path to Greatness, and there's a few things that we're going to need to cover, and I hope that you'll join us for this final broadcast of Path to Greatness. We have a beautiful final class dedication. This week's class is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmat Tzipora Bat Latifa Alea Shalom by her daughter Renee Adams, and for the Shiloshim of her beloved aunt Rose Razel Bat Chava Le'ilui Nishmat Rachel Bat Sophie Shefie Alea Shalom, Jamil Bat Rivka, Rabbi David Ben Rivka, Shlomo Ben Rivka, Rachel Bat Yafa, Yvette Bat Bahiyeh, Yaakov Ben Sarah, Leah Bat Mazal, Moshe Chaim and Jacqueline, Shlomo Ben Rivka, Saadia, Alehem HaShalom. And for the Refuah Shelema of Marco Mordechai Ben Jamile, Rachel Ichaya Bat Yehudit, Rachel Bat Esther, Linda Bat Rachel, Rav Yeshua Yosef Pinto Ben Zari by Jamie Sutton. All, of course, Betoch Shar Cholei Amo Yisrael, amongst all of the other people who are unfortunately unwell. We should be zochet to see a refuah shlema for all of them very, very quickly. Okay, so let's begin. So we've spoken a lot about the process of achieving perfection and being honest enough to be able to see and know yourself to the point where you're ready to change. Last week's discussion was the idea, or we talked about the idea surrounding whether or not or how a person can achieve this, difficult goal, perhaps, by focusing on what it is that they need to do. But we were then left with the conundrum of once a person realizes what the aim or the mission is, how do they make sure that they're actually growing or progressing in a way which is healthy and works? And to that end, I think we discussed this concept of achieving this change or this growth through slow, tiny, incremental steps, or instead by trying to make some sort of jump that gets a person to where they need to be. And we talked about those two ideas, moving too quickly or not moving fast enough. So I want to maybe perhaps get started right at that point, and that's hopefully where we'll be able to get lift off from. Now, the Alter writes in the Sefer, we're reading through Mind Over Man from Rabbi Kilson, condensed from the Shiurim of Rabbi Per, but based on the ideas of the Alter of Nevardik, and he communicates something which I think is very, very powerful, because these two ways, this idea of moving slowly or the idea of moving quickly, of trying to take on some massive change or trying to grow in tiny incremental steps, that sits in front of every single person in life, and the choice has to be made, who I am and what I need. But at the same time that we have this choice of what it is that we need to do, there's something else here as well, and that is the recognition of what it is that I need to do, having that program playing in the back of my head, and how that actually changes a human being's life. So let's imagine this idea. The rabbi gives an example. You have people who are studying in a class. We talk about loving your children. And you can go to 10 classes on loving your kids. And then all of a sudden, your kid does something to you which is so disgusting, which is so horrible, which is so depressing, that you think to yourself, I can't believe I even had this kid. What a mistake to give birth to him, right? You're full of anger. A person gets classes about, going on dating and not being too picky. And then they're out and they don't like the guy's nose. What do you want from my life? I don't like his nose, Right now, when I'm in the real world, quote unquote, when I have to live with the real life ramifications of my decisions, all these decisions, how do they even help? How does it help that I went to a class in a controlled environment when I then need to make these decisions on, quote unquote, the battlefield of life? So he gives an amazing example. He says, imagine a person goes to the army. So they sit there and they prepare you. How do they prepare you? They make you undo and make your gun 50 times, faster and faster. Disassembling it, putting it back together, faster and faster and faster. Then you have to do it with your eyes closed. Then they tell you, they grab your gun and they wake you up in the middle of the night with all your friends, and they run you out to the field and they tell you, crawl under these ropes. And they play loud music, loud sounds of gunfire over the loudspeakers, and you're sitting there crawling in the mud. By the end of your training, what have you done? Really, you've done nothing. Think about this. Every single soldier, every single chayal in Tzahal, what have they done by the end of their time in in preparation for the army? They've done nothing. They've crawled a little bit around in the mud. They've put their gun together when there's no one that they're fighting against. They shot at a target that's not moving, and then they feel like they're a soldier. How's that supposed to help you for the battlefield? And the answer is, although there's nothing that can prepare you for battle like battle itself, there's nothing that can prepare you for a nisayon, for tests in life, like tests themselves. You could go over the mantras 100 times. And you cannot be ready when the time comes to actually act upon it. But that little feeling, there's a little tiny voice. When the bullets start flying over your head in war, for the first time you're experiencing the real thing, where you think to yourself, I've heard this before. I know this. I was trained for this. When you need to crawl in the mud and bullets are actually flying over your head, you remember, I once did this. I crawled in the mud. I heard these sounds, and even though I know that it wasn't the real deal, and I've never faced this level of challenge or of difficulty, I understand in myself that I have something to work with. It means, at the very least, that I don't quit and run home. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like that our series, up until this point, when we talked about this idea of a path to greatness, and I'm sure that there were some people who never listened even to one class. You know why? Because I named it a terrible title. I called it a path to greatness. And I'm sure that there are people out there who are thinking, this rabbi's out of his mind. I'm barely struggling to hold on in Corona to my life, and we're talking about a path to greatness. Talk to me about a path to sanity, and that class I'll sign up for. Talk to me about a path for for dealing. What are you talking about, path to greatness? But the answer is that is always how greatness works. When you study, to do a heart transplant, the conditions that you study the heart in medical school, you're studying on a blooming frog. You're dissecting a frog. You're figuring out how to do CPR on someone that's on a doll. That's not going to make a difference if you blow into the mouth or not. But once you learn the motions, once you teach yourself once, twice, 3 times, I've done this. There's a line, there's something that goes on inside of you when you face a situation where you say, I may not have conquered this, but I've seen it. I know the steps that I need to take. And hopefully, these steps, these refrains, these words, these ideas, these stories that we've discovered and learned together over this time, hopefully will stand us in good stead. Now he gives an example of a fire extinguisher. You looked at the fire extinguisher 20 times, but then that time comes when you have to put out a fire. What happens? You grab the fire extinguisher, you look at it for 1 second, you realize you don't have time to read it right now, but you've seen it before. How many times have you looked at that little red box with the glass, and it says, in case of an emergency, break the glass? When the emergency comes, you're not sitting there reading, in case of an emergency, break the glass. You remember what it said. And even though you read it in a time of calm, now in a time of difficulty, you're actually ready to go, you're ready to jump into it. So the challenge is actually that if you can catch yourself succeeding, if you can find yourself doing things that you're getting a little bit better at, if you notice some tiny area of improvement, you realize actually that you are capable of improvement. If you're capable of tiny change, you are capable of enormous change. Those 2 things are the same. It's just more of the same. So catch yourself succeeding. Recognize when you have even a tiny victory that you've achieved in a diet, in business, in saving money, whatever it is, you managed to save $3 on a first class ticket that cost you $6,000. But you searched online and you got it for $6,000 instead of $6,003. You found a website that's not going to charge you the taxes on it. The fact that you saved a little bit of money, that means that you're teaching yourself to be more frugal. And that sounds crazy to most people. But to a Baal Musar, we understand that when you're capable and you show yourself, I can win, I can beat this back, even if it's a little bit, then you learn that you can do really amazing things. And I want to share with you, there's something that propels us. When it's an unexpected thing that propels us. I was just talking this Shabbat, I met someone, a good friend of mine, and he told me, my whole life I lived a very privileged existence. I went to all the best clubs, I went to all the best restaurants, I hung out in the every possible event that you want tickets for, all the great things that you could imagine I had in my life. And he says, and you know what? Life dealt me a couple of blows. And I sat down with this rabbi and we started learning Gemara. He says, I never learned any Gemara in my life. It never spoke to me. I never got it. I never realized what it was talking about. I didn't understand why this should be relevant to me. It didn't float my boat. He says, but then we sat down. I was with this rabbi. I was going through a tough time. He convinced me to learn Gemara with him. I started learning Gemara. He said, Rabbi, I must tell you. He said, one time, the rabbi asked the question to the whole class, and for the first time in my life, I knew the answer. And I said, the reason for the Gemara is according to this opinion. And I was able to whip out the answer. I got the right answer for the Gemara. Never in my life had I understood Gemara. He says, Rabbi, I can't tell you. That feeling of being able to get the right answer to the Gemara, to the question the rabbi was posing. He says, I've had the best this life has to offer. And nothing ever felt to me as good as getting that answer right. He says that those 10 seconds changed my life. Sometimes we as people, we're great at focusing and catching ourselves when we fail, but we're not great at catching ourselves succeeding. Keep a small notebook of all the wonderful things, however small they are, that you're actually managing to do right. You have a great piece of Lashon Hara, Ballerina said earlier, and you don't say it. You have a chance to do something that maybe isn't the right thing, and you don't do it. You have a chance to do something selfish, Instead, you what's it called? You choose to be selfless. It doesn't matter what it is. Like a little notebook. And there was a unbelievable, a little while ago, there was an unbelievable idea that I saw brought down. That on Yom Kippur, you have all the people in the Bet Knesset, and they're saying, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibal. Look at all the terrible things I've done. And one of the challenges is when we actually see ourselves in a truthful light, we realize how small we are. We're so arrogant, but we're so small. We think we're great, we're developed people. But then when we look, we catch ourselves doing like the stupidest things. We think we're really healthy, and then something goes wrong, and we're at the refrigerator in the middle of the night eating chocolate cake out of it with both hands. These things that we realize that we're so small. But the problem is, when you think you're small, you remain small not because the challenges are too hard, but because you think that you're too small to defeat a big challenge. So one of the ideas that they had was on Yom Kippur, when you're beating yourself up about how terrible you are, they would also do another one where they started saying out loud the mitzvot that they had done. Now, I don't know if that came from the right place or the wrong place. Sometimes people are trying to rewrite Judaism and come up with new halachot. I don't know if it came from the right place or the wrong place, but I do know that whether or not you're supposed to say that out loud, it's a great and a very important thing to be able to remember. Yes, I failed here and here and here and here and here, but I succeeded here. In between all those failures, between all those raindrops, I had a couple of moments. And if I had a couple of moments, there's something there to be able to build on. It's an important thing to recognize these things, because when you do, these little things along the pathway, I imagine to myself, if a person has to drive cross country, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm the type of person that when the light goes on for the gas tank, when the light says you're on empty, I laugh in the face of an empty gas light. I know that I have another 50 miles to go. When the thing hits, the last line on the empty and my wife is freaking out, I'm like, no. It goes like beneath the empty before you run out of gas. Why do I do that? Because I'm a crazy person, right? But the point is, as you're driving along the road and you're trying to figure out if you can make it 3 more miles, or if you get off right now, you're having these questions in your head. Life is like that. You're on a highway, and everything that you fail at, every difficulty that you have, every challenge that you have, it saps you, drags fuel out of your tank, and eventually you just die at the side of the road. Not because there's anything wrong with the car, but because you didn't refuel. Think of the successes that you have as gas stations along the way. And if you don't stop in them and visit them and spend a couple of minutes recuperating and filling up the tank and reminding yourself that you are capable, you will think yourself incapable, even if you actually are. So it's important to try and remember to build the foundations that you have as well as you can before you try and achieve high goals that can actually rob you of a feeling of success before you even take one step. The world likes to tell us today that we are weak animals and we cannot control ourselves. I still remember the advertisement for Pringles. You guys remember that? Right on top of the Pringles can, it says, "Once you pop, you can't stop." Yeah, anyone remember that? Once you pop, you can't stop. And the truth is, there's a little bit of wisdom to that. I don't know if there's ever been a single human being. They should have a Guinness Book of World Records for the one person in history that opened up a can of Pringles and only ate one chip, right? Once you pop, you can't stop. But this idea, it's not just about one Pringle, right? It's all about this whole world. Yeah, you make a buck. Once you pop, you can't stop. A person has some sort of desires of the flesh. Once you pop, you can't stop. Yeah, I get drawn into it again. Each sin, each thing, each mistake pulls me in one more time. Once you pop, you can't stop. That's the world's refrain. You can't help yourself. Don't hold yourself back. Be true to yourself. You're not being true to yourself. You're being true to your inner animal. When you lose your temper, are you being true to yourself because you didn't control yourself? No, you let yourself go. So let's call a spade a spade. Say the Ba'alei Musar. You can change and you can stop even if you've popped. Write that down. Once I pop, I could still stop. That's the path to greatness. To recognizing that even if I made a mistake once, it does not mean that my destiny is written in stone to fall again and again and again on this mistake. I fell yesterday and the day before and the day before, but you know what? It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. Come on, you can do it. That's what the path of greatness is communicating to each and every one of us. Now, I read the most magnificent line in this book about Rav Breuer. Rav Breuer was at the end of his life, he got very, very sick, and he was blind. And someone came to him expecting him to be very upset, and they came to him and they're trying to cheer him up. And what happens? God, it just is so amazing. Listen to what he says. You know when you read something your whole life and you understand one idea, one kind of version of it, and then someone shares it with you from another perspective and it just blows your mind? Listen to this, and listen to how he reads this Mishnah in an entirely new way. He was blind. He couldn't even read the Sefarim, the books that brought him so much joy, the books of the Torah. He started losing his hearing. And when people would come to him to cheer him up, he would say with a big smile on his face, Ezehu Ashir, who is a wealthy man, Hasamech bechelko, he who rejoices. How do you translate it? You heard this Mishnah 1,000 times. Hasamech bechelko, he rejoices in his portion or in her lot. You know, I have $10,000 of savings. I don't have 100,000. I got 10,000. That's good. 10,000 is good. Samech bechelko, you're happy with your portion. But the rabbi said it in a much more powerful way. He lost his sight. He lost his hearing. And they came to him thinking he would be depressed. And he says with a smile, Ezehu Ashir, who is a wealthy man. Hasameach bechelko, he who could find joy bechelko, even if he is only a portion of himself. That's not only reserved, this chidush is not only reserved for people who are unwell and for people who are disabled. It's not only reserved for people who suffer tremendous tragedy, but it applies to them too. You know, you lost someone in your life, chas v'shalom bar minan, person loses a child. There's nothing worse than losing a child. But some people think you lose a child, you shut your life, you shut your brain, you shut your heart, and you just shut down everything, and all the other kids have to go and be miserable for the rest of their life, and you're never allowed another day of happiness. Because they think to themselves, so I don't know, if I don't have all of me, then what do I have? Samech bechelko. Yes, there's a part of me that is gone, and it's gone forever, and it is terribly, terribly tragic. But I have a piece left. Samech bechelko. You know, I failed in this exam, I failed in this business venture, I failed in this relationship. But there's some relationships that I have that I'm being successful in. Bechelko, finding joy in parts, in halves, in quarters. What a magnificent interpretation in this pasuk. There was once a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Ezra. He came to visit him, and unfortunately he suffered from a debilitating disease that slowly but surely took everything from him. It took his sight, it took his hearing, it took his senses. He couldn't move his arms, very much. He only move his fingers a little bit. He couldn't move his legs. So he's paralyzed. He can't speak. He can't do anything. It's horrible. They came to him and they said to him, Rabbi, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you managing? And he motioned for them to bring him a siddur. And they brought him a siddur. And he's flipping through the pages with his fingers at the end of his bed. And he turns to the Hallel. And he gets to the pasuk. He says, Asabem kesef v'zahav. Their gods are made of gold and silver. Ma'aseh yedei adam. They are made by the hands of man. The idols of the world. Pe lahem v'lo yidaberu. They have a mouth and they can't speak. And he points up with his fingers. I have a mouth and I can't speak. Oznaim lahem. They have ears they can't hear. I have ears I can't hear. Enayim lahem v'lo yiru. I have eyes and I can't see. Yedem lo yimishun, ragleim lo yalechu. They have hands that cannot feel and feet that cannot walk. My hands. I've lost my sense of touch. I can't feel anymore what I'm pointing at. What my fingers dance over. I can't walk. He pointing. He says, and what's the difference between me and this worthless idol that's described in Hallel? I also have all these things that I cannot use. And they were struck by the power of what he was pointing at in the book. They asked him how he was feeling, and he says, look, I have a mouth that doesn't work, and ears, and eyes, and legs, and hands. It all doesn't work. So they're looking at him, well, okay. And then he moves his hand further down in Hallel. And he points, and he points, and he points, and he points, and he points with an urgency. He's pointing with all his seriousness, with all of his energy in the book. And they look to see what he's pointing at. And he's pointing at the pasuk that says, Yisrael betach b'Adonai ezram umaginam hu. Yisrael believes in God. And Ezram, he is their help, umaginam, and their shield. What was Rabbi Ezra saying? What was his Ezram? What was helping him more than anything else? Betach b'Hashem, that he trusted in God. And he understood that if this was part of God's plan, this is the road that I'm supposed to travel. And I can find joy in traveling the road that God has set for me. Wow. What an unbelievable perspective. Now I think that is also true about each and every one of us in the situations that we have in our lives. Sometimes we feel, Pe lahem v'lo yedaberu. I'm trying to convince somebody of something and they're not listening. I keep trying to talk to my wife, my children, my parents. They're not hearing me. Oznaim lahem v'lo yishma'u. Or I have ears, they don't work. Maybe not physically, but maybe as an example, I don't seem to understand the people around me and their challenges. My child comes to me, they're in pain, but I can't hear. I don't understand what's bothering them. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't relate. It's oznaim lahem. Ragleim lo yalechu, all these different challenges. A person could look at it and they could get them down and they could feel like all they are is some sort of fashioned idol that has no purpose and no mission. But Yisrael, you know what makes a person a Yisrael, a Jew? Betach b'Hashem. Believe in Hashem. Understand that this path was chosen specifically for you. Now this is unbelievable. I need to drive this idea home. You say this again and again and again and again and again, and suddenly the problems that the world sends you start to shrink. My father, all the time, he would always say this expression, and he would say it very quickly. It would sound a little bit half swallowed. So kind of like he would say, Shem Yishmor, Shem Yishmor, Shem Yishmor. He was driving in the car, we would get to a red light, he'd need to brake a little quickly, his hand would zoom out to block me, okay, protect his son. And he would say, Shem Yishmor. What I hear all the time, my brothers and sisters will tell you, B'Shem Hashem, Na'aseh v'Nasliach. In the name of God, Na'aseh, we will do v'Nasliach. How did he say that? He said that when we went running for a plane, that we were late invariably because we were Syrians. We were always late for the plane. And what would happen? My father would say, B'Shem Hashem, Na'aseh v'Nasliach. In the name of Hashem, we will do, and we will achieve, and we will be successful. You hear that again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Eventually, what happens in a moment of panic? It bursts from your lips. This mantra that's been stewing all this time, all of a sudden it brightens a very dark day. B'Shem Hashem, Na'aseh v'Natzliach. So we discussed two different ways of improvement in this world. One is this slow but sure, the tortoise that always wins the race by plodding slowly, one step after another, taking tiny steps forward. We discussed as well a situation where a person can't wait for that. It's not enough inspiration. He needs the speed. You know how that works? You know, as an example, the example he gives, the altar is like a child. You have a child, he can't walk. He holds on to the couch. The mother or the father says, come to Papa, come here, right, like that. And what does the kid do? He's very, very scared, but eventually he does his first walk. And what does every kid do on their first walk? They don't walk slowly, leisurely towards you. They do this kind of, right? They run before they walk. You know why? Because at that stage, they need speed to maintain balance. Same as riding a bike, right? You try and ride a bike really slowly. You can't do it. The only way to ride a bike, what keeps you standing, is the speed that you're traveling in. So there are times when changing something very slowly is just not going to work. If I am an incredibly negative person, people don't want to be around me. My wife, my children, they don't want to hang. They want to leave the house. My business partners want to dissolve the business. I'm always cynical. I can't be 10% less cynical. You know why? That won't change anything. If 9 times out of 10, I'm still very cynical, but I was not cynical one time. It might be growth in an objective terminology, but for the problems I'm facing and the pain that I'm dealing with, I need speed, and I need to do that now. What's the problem? I'm a cynical person. I don't believe I could go faster than this. So what do you do with this conundrum? And here is where the Alter introduces the third step. Slow, fast, and what I like to call Godspeed. You know they used to say that in the old movies? Right? The person would go, he would have like a little sword or a dagger, and he would have to go and face the dragon, right? You know what I mean? And this dragon is like the size of a mountain. And they would say, go forth and Godspeed, right? You know that? Remember that was always like that? Godspeed. But the Alta's quoting Godspeed. There's slow, there's speed, and then there's Godspeed. You can't go fast enough. And you know what? That's okay. But that's only if you're the one that's driving. Yisrael betach badonai ezram umaginam hu. If you say to yourself, I am incapable of the type of seismic change I need to make. I can't do it. I also can't change slowly, so I need to change fast. So Borei Olam, God in heaven, you need to support cataclysmic change. You need to support mammoth change in me because I can't go slow. But you could do anything. And what's fascinating is, if you look, says the Alter, in the Pasuk, the Torah already hints to this idea. The Torah says, V'koveh Hashem yachalifu koach, koach, koach. And those that have faith in God, yachalifu koach, what do? They switch strength. Strange word, we'll come back to that. Koveh Hashem, those who have faith in God, yachalifu koach, they switch strength. Ya'alu ever kansharim, they grow wings like the eagles. Yarutzu velo yigau, they run but they do not tire. Yelchu velo yafu, they walk and they do not grow weary. Ask the Alter, whoa, I don't understand. How do we just do that? How do we just do that? In the Pasuk, we're talking about running before we're talking about walking. Do you run before you walk? And the answer is yes. Lots of times you need to run in order to walk. You know, we have an example of this in the Torah. Yosef HaTzadik. He feels alone in the world. Again, I always try and get people to understand. Now, when we do not mean that this is what Yosef is thinking, because Yosef is a tzaddik of unimaginable caliber. But on some level, the Torah describes a moment of internal struggle. And you have to see it in the context of the Torah's painting it. He comes to his father's dream, and with his dream, and his father yells at him. He thought his father was the only one on his side. Ve'aviv, right? Vayigar bo aviv, and his father puts him down for it. Because his father he knew the danger of him sharing those dreams with his brothers. The brothers hate him. They sold him. And I always point this out. He's now in the house of Potiphar. There's no one alive who cares about him, who knows he's alive. Yaakov, you'd imagine, cares about him, loves him, but thinks he's dead. The brothers who know he's alive, they would rather him dead. Okay? So here he is, all alone, he's a worker, and suddenly someone pays attention to him. Suddenly someone is showing him love and affection, and not only that, they want to be with him. That is a very powerful nisayon. It's a very difficult test. Says the Pasuk, she grabs his coat and there's nobody there. And Chazal tell us, the ish en babayit, there was no man in the house, doesn't just mean that there was no man in the house. It means that there was no physical man in the house, but there was no man left in Yosef. He couldn't fight anymore. It was too long, it was too difficult, this was too tempting, and he feels himself about to fall. Vayaros achutza. And he fled and he ran outside. He couldn't walk out. If he tried to walk out, it wouldn't have worked. He needed to run. He needed to drop it all. The guy who sees the temptation in business, who knows that if he does this one crooked deal, he'll be wealthy for the rest of his life. Can he ease himself out? He needs to run out of the room. He needs to tell them, keep the stocks. Because if he doesn't do a clean cut and run, if he doesn't run, he can't walk. Says the Pasuk, V'kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. Kovei Hashem, those who have faith in God, they trade koach. Strange word. It should say they get koach. The Yitav Lev, who was the Rav of Satmar, came once to a great Talmid Chacham, a great tzaddik called the Maharam Shik, who was at the end of his life and he was suffering, and he'd been the most amazing Jew and he'd done all the best things ever, and he's feeling very weak. And he said, the rabbi says to him, he says, is there a problem, or you just weak, or you just feeling shvach, like they say? And he says, I'm feeling weak. So he says, the Pasuk says, Kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. What does the word yachalifu mean? To switch. Listen to this. He says it's amazing. There's two kinds of kinyanim, a way that a person acquires something in halakha. One way you acquire something is you do hagbah. So as an example, if I want to buy this yarmulke, so I want it to be mine, you lift it up. That's kinyan hagbah. Another way, let's say I have a cow. I want to acquire the cow. I take the leash and I pull the cow. That's called kinyan mishicha, where I drag the cow. I make some sort of spatial differential in the placement of the object. High, far, high, far, high. Either way, I acquire this thing by moving it from its place. Then there's another kinyan. Some of you may have been at a wedding where the guy who's doing the wedding, the rabbi who's doing the wedding, will have a sudar, a handkerchief in his pocket, or a kippah. He'll sit there with the chatan, they'll fill out all the responsibilities of the ketubah, and then he says to the guy, the chatan who's doing the ketubah, he says, look, you're going to take this yarmulke, you're going to lift it in the air, you're going to take my pen, you're going to lift it in the air, and then you're going to become obligated in everything in the ketubah. What? How did that happen? I did something to the yarmulke, to the kippah, to the pen, and now I'm obligated on the ketubah. That's called kinyan chalipin. That's an example of a tachalif, something that I do over here, which then has an effect over here. You have an object and I have an object. We want to switch them. I make a kinyan on yours, and that kinyan also acquires my thing that I'm switching with you. It acquires it for you. Okay? Says the Yitav Lev, he says to the rabbi, V'kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. You're weak. You need strength. You want to borrow strength from God. He's the one that has all the strength in the world, right? Amonai ish milchama. God can go to war. God doesn't weary. He neither slumbers. He doesn't sleep. You're tired. You need help. Reach out to Hashem. Get koach. Get strength from Him. But how do you get what's His? V'kovei Hashem. You do a chalipin. You switch. You swap with God. You barter. What is the material you use to barter with God for strength, internal strength? V'kovei Hashem, faith. Faith is the bartering material. You have faith in Hashem, yachalifu koach. What do you get? You get koach. A person is found in a place where they are struggling, they're weak, they're tired, they can't fight anymore. They need strength from God. Oh dear God, make me strong. What do you do for that? Kovei Hashem. You swap with God. You give Him your faith. You place your burdens in His hands. And you bring strength down into your existence. So if a person is sitting there and thinking, I can't do this, it's too hard for me to change, recognize you're probably right. And you can change slowly. But if you need to change quick, then what do you need to do? You need to say to Hashem, I can't do this step by step. I need overnight. I need a reboot. I need an upgrade in my system. And that's what David HaMelech says when he says, Lev tahor bira li Elokim. People don't realize, it does not say, Lev tahor bara li Elokim, which would mean a pure heart was created for me by God. Lev tahor bira li means create a pure heart for me. Veruach nachon, and a spirit of righteousness, of straight, chadesh bikirbi, reinvigorate my compass, my direction in life. We're asking God, we're not thanking Him for having done it, we're asking Him to do it now. When a person asks that of God, then they can change suddenly and in an instant, and they can change dramatically. You know, I want to share with you where this goes to. When a person feels that they have Hashem on their side, they suddenly realize that their emotions are not in control, and even if they've popped, they can still stop, right? They realize that this works. And Rabotai, I want to illustrate to you the great power that sits within humanity. And this shift in perspective, and I want to show you, even if you've never had a breakthrough moment of emunah, that this is something that applies to everybody. This massive shift in perspective is enough to change you as a human being, to do things that you thought you could not do. There was a terrible story a long time ago. I think it was maybe 10 years ago actually by now, all right? They even turned it into a film, like a documentary. It was called 127 Hours. It's a story about a climber who's climbing, and as he's climbing in a crevice, he's having the time of his life. All of a sudden, he realizes that he's about to fall. The rope basically collapses underneath him, and he realizes that as everything begins to fall apart all around him, right? He falls straight through the crevice, and his arm gets trapped under a boulder. He's there for 24 hours. He's there for 36 hours, for 48 hours, for 72 hours. And he realizes that he's going to die here. He has in his pocket a pocket knife, ladies and gentlemen. And there's this moment where you realize the enormity of what is about to happen in the story. He's like looking at his arm, and he's looking at the pocket knife. And he's looking at his arm, and he's looking at the pocket knife. And he proceeds to saw off his arm, to leave it behind under the boulder, so that he can actually save his life. If I asked you, do you think you could cut off your own arm? Not a single person here would say that they could. What if I told you, and if your life depended on it? I don't think I could. I don't think I could. But the world tells us a different story. The world tells us that when you're in that situation and your brain wraps itself around the fact that either I cut off my arm or I'm dying, suddenly there's this renewed strength to do something that you never thought that you could, because you can't not. You can't not. Is this clear? There are many examples of this. A person walks into the doctor, he thinks he's very healthy. He goes in, he has a cold, he goes in, there's something, the doctor comes back in after 3 minutes. He says, I don't know how to say this to you, so I'm just going to come out and say it. You have a tumor behind your head, your brain, that if we don't operate on it right now, what's it called? You're going to die tomorrow. The guy says, are you kidding me? Yeah, we have to go in right now. We need you to sign these papers. And the guy says, what are the risks? He says, well, probably half of your body you're not going to be able to remove Anything on the right side of your body, your arm, your leg, your face is going to droop on one side. But if I go in right now, I should be able to save you. Okay, signs paper. You just signed away half of your body? How do you do that? Because your brain wrapped its head around the idea that it's either this or nothing. There are moments in our life when we realize we cannot live the way we are living. And even though, when I had that realization, even though I know that the journey to get to where I need to get to is so difficult, it doesn't matter. Because I know I can't live this way. The bolder guy knows I can't live like this with my arm trapped. There are relationships where a person is trapped. There are midot, character traits, which trap a person. Addictions, which trap a person. And when you get to that stage, and you never thought that you could, but when an addict hits rock bottom is that moment, that second in his life, when he realizes, I can't go on living like this. If I'm living like this, I'm not living at all. And then you're capable of chopping off your arm. Figuratively, you could take a piece of yourself and leave it behind. In a toxic relationship, you are strong enough to get out. Or you are strong enough to work hard enough to keep it working, depending on your situation. We do not know the strength that we have when our brains, when our minds can convince us that this is what needs to be done. When a person has in their mind, and they are absolutely clear, and they've wrapped their head around the idea that this is what needs to be done, and God will help me do it, He will help me get there, suddenly they can achieve things that up until that point were unimaginable. You know, there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, Shitulim bevet Amonai. A person, Shitulim, means planted, bevet Amonai, in the house of God. Bechatzrot Elokenu Yafrichu. In the corridors, in the courtyards of God, Yafrichu, they grow. One of the biggest challenges in a person's life is trying to figure out where they have planted themselves. What is their core? What is their essence? What are they working towards? The Gemara in Baba Kama tells an unbelievable example of a certain rabbi. He had two students. One of the students wanted him to teach halakha. The other student wanted him to teach agadah. Okay? Now this is amazing. These two students, one of them wanted one type of learning, the other one wanted the other. So every time the rabbi would teach one, this one would complain, they would make him teach the other, he'd teach that one, the other one. He said, you know what it's like? He says, it's like an older man, a person who's aging, and he has a wife who's young and a wife who's old. The wife who's young, every time she sees a gray hair come out, she yanks it out. She doesn't want anyone to know that her husband's old. The older woman looks at this, looks at the husband. He has black hair now. Every time she sees a black hair, she pulls it out. After 3 months, he's bald. He doesn't have this. Nimtza kireach mikan umikan. He's bald from this, and he's bald from that. You need to hear this point. If you do not know where you are planted, then you'll pull here and you'll pull here. Your business will pull and your family will pull and your religion will pull. You must figure out, where am I planted? Where is my essence locked and loaded on? And on that thing, you can build everything else around. If a person locks themselves on their family, sometimes what winds up happening is their religion, their morality, other things will falter. I see my child is not doing the right thing. My number one priority is family. So I'm not going to tell my son no for anything because family's first. That's not the right thing. It's not the right thing. A person could choose his money or his physical pleasures, also not the right thing. When shetulim bevet Amonai, when you're planted in the house of Hashem, even if you're enjoying things outside, but your roots are there, you want to do the right thing. You want to lead a meaningful, a purposeful, a moral, a life you could be proud of. Then your family will slot in the right way. You'll love them because you're supposed to love them. When you need to tell them off, you'll tell them off. When you need to cut back, you'll cut back. When you need to spend more, you'll spend more. Because it's not about being stingy or spending a lot of money. It's about doing the right thing in the right time. Where are you planted? Which midah are you planted on? Are you focusing on? You're focusing on too many things, you'll wind up doing nothing. What is your core midah? That which you live and die by. Is it your word? Is it your kindness? Is it your compassion? What are you planted on? Avraham was planted on chesed. Yitzchak was planted on gevurah. Yaakov on emet. But each and every one of us has a way of finding some core midah, which literally it's like jet fuel for us. And just like the jet fuel in a rocket ship, it doesn't only take itself to space. It doesn't only take the walls of the rocket to space. Anything that's in the rocket also goes great distances. If emet is powering you, then it will power you and whatever's with you, your family, your business, everything. If gevurah is powering you, it will power your business, your family, your dreams, your passions. You'll be the person that's able to do great things in the world because of your incredible passion and your dedication to doing the right thing. Whatever that is, figure out what that shitulim bebet amunai is. You got to make that commitment. You have to decide to plant it somewhere. And once you've done that, then you have the opportunity of going very, very far. May Hashem bless each and every one of us in this difficult thing called life. Life itself is not difficult. The problem is that we're not actually looking at life. And I want to just, if I could, for 1 second, give you an example. Has anyone here seen those little plastic things that they sometimes put on the windows? It's like a piece of plastic, and it's kind of, in Hebrew they would say it's mitushtash. It's unclear. You put it outside of a shower so that you can't see through the shower door. You put it on the front door of your house so it obfuscates, even though the window is perfectly clear. And if you were to pull that off, you could see everything as it is, in real time, in HD. The fact that there's this little tiny, it can be a millimeter thick, and it makes everything that you're looking at impossible to discern. You see some shapes. That's how we view life today. We see good things in this world, but we're not quite sure if it's really good, if it's not so good. How much do I have? How little do I have? The Torah is the only thing that allows us, slowly but surely, to chip away, to peel away this thing. And that's why when you meet great rabbis and great sages, they have such amazing advice. Not because they have Ruach HaKodesh, because they're actually looking at the world the way it is. And not the way, other people sometimes, the way they wish it would be. They don't see things through some sort of rosy colored glasses. They see things as they are. Life is not necessarily so hard. The challenge is the overlays that we place above it. If I always tell myself I'm a victim, I can't look at my life and I can never get it in order. What if, as an example, I always look at my life and I'm saying I'm happy, I'm lucky to be alive, bechelko? Then your whole life gets seen through that prism. That is the challenge of a person who's trying to achieve perfection. First, to be able to see clearly. Then to be able to understand that he or she is capable of that change. And maybe not by themselves. Maybe they need God to help them, like we said, Kovei Hashem yachalifu koach. They'll run even before they walk. Okay? Maybe they need that help. But then the dedication and the knowledge of knowing that if I put in the effort, I can change. And if I can change even the tiniest bit, I could change completely. May God give us the strength. May God give us the power. May God give us the fortitude. May God give us the belief in ourselves to be able to become the very best people that we can become, the very best dads, the very best children, the very best sisters and brothers, the very best kids that we could ever become, because we know that the challenges that we face are things that we can overcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to this series of Mind Over Man called Path to Greatness. Hazaku Baruch to each and every one of you. There's been many, many classes. Over the next week, we're probably going to figure out what our next series is going to be. If anyone has any specific things that they'd like to hats that they'd like to throw in the ring, they're more than welcome. You can message me on Instagram, on Facebook, or on Zoom. We'll be able to get it from all the different platforms, and hopefully we'll be able to learn together for many, 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 many more years to come in this unbelievable, beautiful gift that we have called life, in this fantastic path towards greatness. See you soon. Have a good one. Mwah.